Welcome to this edition of Rattling the Bars. I'm Mansa Musa, and today we have a comrade of mine and a good brother, a freedom fighter, former political prisoner, prisoner of war, Jalil Muntaqim. Welcome to Rattling the Bars, Jalil.
Assalamu alaikum, peace, paz, Bargani, Jumbo, Afede, Guten Tag, paz, peace. Whatever your language is, I speak to you and address you in solidarity and peace.
And before we get started, Ramadan Mubarak.
Ramadan Kareem, brother. I appreciate that.
Yes,
Thank you very much.
And tell the Rattling the Bars audience a little about who is Jalil Muntaqim.
That's a good question. That's a long, extensive question. I mean, it's a long, extensive answer to that question. Jalil Muntaqim. I am a member. I am a veteran member of the Black Panther Party, the Black Liberation Army. I have been engaged in the struggle since the age of 16. I actually have engaged in the struggle since the age of, since I was born, you might say. Let me just preface this one. My mom was a student of African dance as a young child, and she used to teach African dance to myself and my sister. And her teacher told her that we are of African descent, and this is what she taught us. So I was raised with the understanding that I was of African descent. She did not allow us to be identified or named a Negro or a coon or a black person or any other derogatory names that has been launched against black people in this country, new African people in this country. And so as a result of that, I always have been conscious of the reality of the situation, our situation here in this country. At the age of 16, I joined the Black Panther Party, became a member of the Black Panther Party. And at the age of 18, I was recruited into the Black Underground. By the time I was 19, I was with Black Underground that evolved and turned into the Black Liberation Army. By the time I was 19, I was captured. I was captured on August 28, 1971, the week after they murdered Comrade George Jackson on August 21st, 1971. Allegedly, our action was in retaliation of his murder. And it resulted in my being in prison for 49 plus years, almost 50 years in prison as a result. I didn't get out until 2020, right. October 6, 2020. And also, I'm also an author. I've written 2 books, one called We Are Our Own Liberators, right? And if anyone interested, they can get it from blackdragonmme.com. We own Liberators, blackdragonmme.com. And the other book I've written, have published is called Escaping the Prism, PRISM, Escaping the Prism, Fade to Black. And that can be obtained from AK Press. Let me see what else. As a result of my incarceration, I continued to be an organizer. I was organizing while I was in high school. I started the first Black Student Union in my high school. That was in San Jose, California. And as a result of that, we was able to get Black study programs established because there was no ethnic programs in the schools back then. And so we was able to get Black studies programs going on at that time. And so as my process, my evolving, when I went to prison, I continued to organize. In 1970.
Well, stop right there. We want to,
okay.
Yeah, because we want.
Yeah,
I got you. But that's good information, right? And in full disclosure to our audience, I met Jalil as he was getting ready to go into his prison organized. I met Jalil in, I think it was 73 when they was making a call to take the issue of political prison, prisoners of war to the UN. And it's right at this juncture that I want to open the next question is walk us through the progression of the strategy to internationalize America's oppression of Black and brown people. You know, give us a, because we know that your strategy has been, and your organizational strategy has been to internationalize our struggle. And it be like you find like a lot of conversation around why internationalize it when we have it, and people have a tendency to look at the national problem, what's going on a national level, and feels as though when you say international, it's almost as if you're overlooking local situations. So walk us through that progression.
Okay, very good. Back in 1975, I returned from New York City to San Quentin Prison. And at the time when I returned back to San Quentin Prison, I was put in adjustment center. And as a result of me put in adjustment center, I decided that it was necessary for us to move forward in terms of our struggle. One of the things that when I was in adjustment center, I was locking next door to Ruchell McGee, the oldest political prisoner in the United States today.
That's right.
And San Quentin 6 down in the same gallery. We was in the adjustment center,
that's right.
The area where Comrade George was murdered at. And I received a pamphlet, a newsletter from a National Committee on the Defense of Political Prisoners. Was a committee that was put together in support of the Panther 21 case, right, back in 1970s, right. 71, right? Yuri Kochiyama, who was a friend and member of the AAOU, African American organization that Malcolm X had put together, right? Yuri Kochiyama. She sent me a newsletter, and in the newsletter they talk about human rights and the issues of human rights. So at that point in time, and knowing that Al-Haj Malik Shabazz had told us, he had instructed us that it's necessity for us to take our struggle to the international arena, and that our struggle is more than just a civil rights, it's a human rights. And so with that understanding, Al-Haj Malik Shabazz says, for as long as we continue to maintain our struggle within the civil rights dynamics of struggle, right, that the United States will continue to confine our struggle within those parameters, right, within the jurisdiction of the United States as being a civil rights issue. And he said that, Al-Haj Malik Shabazz, Malcolm X said that we need to take it to the international community, right, and make our struggle a human rights one. And so at that point in time, I decided that it was necessary for us to establish what I organized what I call the U.S. Prisoners Petition Campaign to the United Nations.
That's right.
And it was the first petition campaign that was submitted to the United Nations that dealt with the issues, not only the conditions of our prison situation, but also the issues of the existence of political prisoners in the United States. So that's one of the areas for which we began to internationalize our struggle. Now, naturally, as you well know, prior to that, our struggle has been internationalized through the Black Panther Party. It was internationalized when Robert Williams went into exile. Right. When the exile, he had to go to Cuba, and he went to China and different other places talking about our struggle. Right. Eldridge Cleaver, when they established the Black Panther Party office in Algeria,
that's right.
Right, and traveled around the country. Huey P. Newton established a working relationship with Mao Zedong when he went to China. And so for us, it's always been a means and a method from which we try to internationalize our struggle and take it out of the jurisdiction, basically the jurisdiction of the U.S. to codify and or limit and prohibit to what degree we're able to fight back, to resist a white supremacy and capitalist imperialism.
All right, let's go right here then. Okay, on that right there. All right. So we recognize the progression, and we recognize the historical significance and the relationship. Okay, but let's look at this here. It's a consensus worldwide that the United Nations, because that's what we're talking about when we talk about internationalizing. We're talking about going to an institutional body to get some type of mandate to come out of it to say that what the United States is doing is inhuman. All right, so the mechanism that we've been talking about is the United Nations, but it's a popular consensus. It's ineffective as a body, right? But mainly when it comes to addressing complaints against the United States and human rights. Case in point, going back to your point, Paul Robeson, they took a petition to the UN in 51. We charged genocide, documenting the lynching of Black people and poor people in this country. Then you referenced Malcolm X, and we also, as you noted, we took it in terms of the strategy that you outlined, took it in and put political prisoners and prisoners of war in that space. But what is it about this body? I understand the international context, but what is it about the United Nations that gives you some type of solace that this is a good place to put attention in? When you look at the Palestinian situation, you look at, they allow the United States to bomb Iraq, but under a false narrative of trying to get you rich uranium. You know what I'm saying? They killed Gaddafi. And, so we know that when it comes to the United Nations, that the United States is really the United States footstool, for lack of better terminology. So educate our audience on why this particular body, under that overview that I just outlined.
Very good. I'm glad you raised that question because there are some contradictions in regards to our movement trying to have the United Nations to support us in the broader scale from which it exists. I think it's important to understand that the United Nations, in terms of international law, is a body of international law. And in as much as there are held together by individuals, nation-state individuals and organizations who may be coattail to the United States because of the money that the United States put into the United Nations, right? It diminishes our capacity to influence the processes. But that doesn't mean that we should try to influence the process. Mm-hmm. And ultimately what it does is that we, by presenting our struggle and our issues to the United Nations, it goes to the people as well, right? Those individuals will bring those issues to the people. And that's what we really want to address. We really want to address the people of the world.
That's right.
In regards to our struggle, right? And so this is the body from which we can do so, at least raise the issues, our concerns, our struggle to that body, right? And so that it can be reached at a broader branch of people. Now, we've had comrades go to Geneva. We've had petitions submitted to Geneva on the issues of our struggle, right? And we need to continue to do so because it is a body of laws, right? International law. We are trying to make the United States adhere to the international law, for instance, the issues of genocide, right? In 2018, I proposed that we bring the international jurors to the United States, and we held an international tribunal. And the international tribunal on October 25th, 2021, they found the United States guilty of 5 charges, right? This is an esteemed body of international jurors. Many of them, some of them have working relationships with the United Nations, and they are now promoting their verdict of October 25th, 2021, stating that the United States is guilty of 5 charges that we brought to them, or 5 charges of mass incarceration, police terror and murder of our people, environmental racism, health inequities, and also the existence of political prisoners. The United States was found guilty by an esteemed body of international jurors on the reality of that they have violated international law as it pertains to those 5 particular issues. And so for us, we're using what mechanism is available to us. If we could create another mechanism for which we can build our international relationship with other folks and people, then we would do so. But that's the only mechanism that's working at this point in time. As you stated, Paul Robeson, in December 17th, 1951, about 2 months after I was born, I had brought the issues of genocide to the United Nations. As you well know, the FBI hindered that process. They would refuse to allow Paul Robeson to leave the country. And although William Patterson was able to go over to Geneva and present the petition, right, they tried to prevent him from coming back to the United States.
Right.
And so for us, it's always a means based upon the instructions of El-Hajj Shabazz, Malcolm X, to find the ways that we can reach our people on the international platform. Those, when I say our people, I'm talking about the progressives on the international platform, let them know what is actually going on here in the United States among Black people, brown people, indigenous people in this country.
All right,
and so it is a mechanism, it's not the end results. It is a method for which we can bring our struggles into the international community.
Okay, and that brings me to my next question. All right, because like you say, and it's a real effective strategy. You have got the international body of people that's directly related to the UN in some shape, form, or fashion to come.
We're supporting our movement now.
To come and review the indictment that we brought, the indictment that we brought about genocide, and you had them review the indictment, and as a result of reviewing the indictment, they came out with the International Tribunal on Human Rights Abuse against Black and Brown and Indigenous People. How are you taking that finding? Because that finding in and of itself, we know it don't have the force of law. It's a nice document and it's a nice support mechanism. How you plan on taking that document and moving the narrative forward to try to start peeling off more support from like countries in terms of recognizing that the United States is practicing genocide against us? How do you plan on taking that document? Because as you said, if that same body would have been the voting body of the General Assembly in the UN, then the United States would be charged, thus duly charged, based on that.
Absolutely.
So how do you plan on taking that?
Let's look at that. Let's look at that on a couple of levels, right? First level is here. The United States is a treaty member of the Genocide Convention of 1948. The United States has on its books, in its federal books, 18 USC 1091, which simply mimics or copies the genocidal doctrine of 1948.
Okay.
Right. But we know that the United States will not charge itself with genocide.
That's right.
Although they're in violation of their own laws. Okay.
On.
And all right, so what we're going to do, what we intended to do, is build our base so that we can file a legal petition in the federal courts, charging the United States having violated their own rules and regulations according to international law, right? And so in that instance, we'll be able to educate greater people, both nationally and internationally, of the contradiction that we have with the United States in regards to their adhering to this false philosophy, this aberrant philosophy of white supremacy. This aberrant philosophy that ensures that other people of color, are inferior to white people. All right. And so when we understand that dynamics, we are raising people's consciousness, right, using international law as well as national dynamics, which we engaged in, right, and building our base of support. We also are building towards what we call people's assemblies. We're building a people's assembly based on what we call a people's senate. And we will have ambassadors who will travel throughout the world and raise the questions, our issues in those particular bodies. We have been over in the Caribbean. We have been in areas of Africa. I went to Greece last year to the International Symposium on Political Prisoners in Greece, Athens, Greece. And I told them at my presentation that you will not be free, the international community will not be free until Black people are free in this country. And so in this way, we're making the connections with the international community based upon the ideal and goals and objective, based upon the decision, the verdict of the international jurors finding the United States guilty of genocide. And so with that understanding, based upon their own violation of their own laws, right, we can do two things. One, bring them to court, right, raise it on a national level, and continue to send out our ambassadors around the world, right, and speak on these issues, raise these questions. We've been to Sudan, we've been to South Africa, we've been to Ghana, we've been to Barbados, we've been to Greece. I got some people they're thinking about having me go to tour parts of Europe and also Latin America. And so this is how we build out our struggle and join the progressive communities around the world who have been engaged in fighting against U.S. imperialism and white supremacy throughout the world.
Okay, and now you know what I like that connection, because as our audience would need to be made aware of, when we talk about international struggle, you've been able to like make the connection in terms of the United States' own laws, and that at some point in time, a forum going to have to be held about that, and they're going to have to address that at some point in time in the court of law in the United States, which gives them a lot more, will give people that got a local mentality and a national mentality, be able to put them in a space where they're comfortable with recognizing that, okay, yeah, we're affected by this because we can see it right here, right now, as opposed to trying to get them to take a broader perspective and say, like Malcolm say, we all in the same boat. All right, we talk about this here, Jalil. All right.
Yes.
All right. Lastly, all right. So you mobilize the necessary support, and you get the necessary results in terms of the United Nations or the courts. So what is the relief that we're asking for? What are we looking to get in return?
Okay.
You know, because I think most people want to know, are we just rebel rousing, or do we have actually got a strategy of like what we want in return and what we're going to do with our return?
Okay, let's look at this a little bit more deliberately. We know that the United States have been found guilty of genocide, right? We know they've been engaged in the process of genocide for the last 400 years, right? We know that the system of white supremacy is not going to just disappear, okay? So it is our duty to divorce ourselves from a system that's been engaging in genocides, right? We have to ensure that we are suffering no more harm, right? The trauma that we have suffered in the last 400 years is indelible. It has been internalized for the most part. And so we have to do a whole new re-education, reprocessing of our consciousness, right? And that means that we have to decolonize ourselves. When I say decolonize our mentality and our thinking in terms of who we are as a people in this country, right? And that's another issue that we have to address, right? Are we, in fact, a colonized nation, a colonized people? And if we are, then we need to figure out some kind of ways how to manage that idea that we need to divorce ourselves from the conditions of colonization. So that would mean that we need to move towards independence, right? I'm saying this here, at the minimum, we need to divorce ourselves from a system that has been engaging in genocide, right? We have to move ourselves from harm. That's what I'm saying, right? We have to move us, because they've been killing us. They've been killing us for the last 400 years, right?
And continue to do it.
And continue to do so, right? When they just shot this kid the other day, this young man the other day, shot him 60 times. Yeah. Right? They shot at him 100 times and shot him 60 times. How many bullets it takes to kill one man, right? That was not just a message to this one guy or this one family. It was a message to everyone, right? Of police terror. That's usually why they found guilty of genocide by the way that they've been murdering us by police terror. You see what I'm saying? Mass incarceration is another issue, right? Mass incarceration, what they found guilty of by the international jurors of mass incarceration. That's genocide. So we got to fight against this mass incarceration. One way to fight against it is to end penal slavery.
Okay.
By the 13 forward, right? By ending penal slavery, we take the incentive out of mass incarceration. That means they cannot profit off our labor, right? A lot of people don't understand that slavery was never abolished totally abolished in the country.
That's right.
Right? We have what we call penal slavery, based on the 13th of the United States Constitution. So that's another area where we're fighting back. Other environmental racism. We know what happened in Flint, Michigan, or Mississippi, right? Why is it that our people, right, health inequities is another area which we found ourselves confronting the issue of genocide, which we found guilty of. Why is that white people live twice as long as black people in this country? Where does that come from? Right? Why is it that it has been stated that black man is an endangered species in this country? Where does that come from? It comes from the idea of white supremacy, right? And trying to maintain a system from which we, black people, brown people, indigenous people, are inferior, maintain inferiority to white superiority, which again, I say is an aberrant philosophy. It's an aberrant psychological, in my understanding, it's a mental disorder. Right. Okay. White supremacy is a mental disorder. That's right. And I say that based upon what the DMSV book says, the diagnostic book says. That's right. The diagnostic book. That's their book. That's their book. Yeah, the psychological diagnostic book states that superiority complex is in fact a complex. It is a psychological disorder. Yeah, that's right. And white supremacy is a derivative of the superiority complex. That's right. Or they feel they're superior to everybody. So these people are crazy. Yeah. So we got to remove ourselves from these people because they have been harming us for the last 400 years. Yeah, you see what I'm saying? I got you. For building this outward, right, both on a national and international level, is extremely important. This is the reason why after the verdict by the international jurors finding the United States guilty on those 5 charges, we decided it's necessary for us to build what we call a People's Senate. Okay. Right? Yeah, talk about that. Yeah, we got to create alternatives to the existing reality of our existence here in the United States. And so what we're doing now, knowing that the United States functions as a corporation, right, in behalf of other corporations, right, the law says, nothing what Jalil says, this is what the law says. The Supreme Court has stated in, I think, Citizens Action, a case called Citizens Action, where they determine that corporations are people. Right. All right. And so we also know that the United States is in fact a corporation, right? Based upon 28 USC 3002, right? Section 15A, right? 28 USC 3002. Right. Commercial code. Right, in commercial code, right? And it informs that the United States is in fact a federal corporation, right? And so when they say our people, right, for the people, by the people, they're not talking about sentient human beings. They're talking about corporations, all right? They function in behalf of corporations, not in front of human beings. And so what we decided that it's necessary for us to build what we call a People's Senate, to divorce ourselves from a system that's not working in our best interest and began to create alternative systems, alternative modes of operation, alternative ways of where we can fulfill our prosperity, our goals, our ambitions, our livelihood outside of the dictates of the system that has been engaging in genocides against us. And so the people center is important. So we're going to have people centers across the country. We're going to build people's assemblies across the country, and we're going to establish the financial and economic basis for which we can be able to strive, utilizing the resources that we have available to us in the cities and states across the country. And this process will begin to ensure that our struggle moving forward is safeguarded, because we have created conditions for which we have a body of people who are engaged in struggle against a system that has been involved with genocide against us. That's not only that, but we're also moving towards national liberation and independence. All right. And this is a hard one for people to chew on. All right. We know that there are sovereign nations in this country, right? Mm-hmm. The Native Americans, the indigenous people in this country, for the most part, are sovereign nations. All right. How come we aren't? That's a question I need to ask. If they can be sovereign nations, how come we aren't? If we look at the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution as an example, right, we realize that we never had opportunity when they promulgated the 13th Amendment in 1865. We never had the opportunity to do two or three things. One, to decide whether we want to stay in the United States, decide whether we want to go to Africa, or return back to Africa, or decide whether we want to create our own homeland, right? What's called a plebiscite vote. Right? So part of our struggle is to ensure that we have a plebiscite vote, make a determination what we want. So the 14th Amendment imposes civilization on the 3 to 5 million African people who were emancipated in 1865. And so for us, it's always been a question of who we are, where is our civilization, who are we in terms of our nationhood that has not been established by us, for us. And so that is another part of this process of our separating ourselves, divorcing ourselves from a system that's been engaged in genocide against us for the last 400 years. Now that we have it law established in terms of international protocols by an international body of international jurists at determined the United States have engaged in this process of genocide against us, then it informs us that we need to separate ourselves and divorce ourselves from a system that's doing us harm, has been doing us harm for the last 400 years. And so that's part of the process.
Okay, so how can we get in touch with you, and how can our viewers get in touch with the Spirit of Mandela?
Very good question. Go to spiritofmandela.org and tap over to the People's Senate, or go to People's Senate spiritofmandela.org, and you'll find all the information you need to find to be involved with this process. We have what we call in the Spirit of Mandela. I'm gonna raise this up so people can see it. Right? You'll find this particular document right here, right? Mm-hmm. For the People's Mandela Explanation and Recruitment Manual, okay? And that's what we're organizing for. Now, when we first initiated this campaign, naturally, in terms of our political prisoners, right, we was moving under the United Nations Spirit Mandela rule, right, which is the standard, basic standards for the treatment of prisoners, right, which they turned into the Mandela Rule. And so we're using that idea of the Mandela Rule, that's why we came with this name, Mandela Rule, so that we can show our people on the inside these institutions, right, these slave penal institutions, these penal slave institutions are granted the same rights that are supposed to be granted to anyone who have been incarcerated or who have been imprisoned, right, based upon the Mandela Rules, right, the standard treatment of prisoners, based upon the United Nations standard treatment of prisoners, which is now the Mandela Rule, right? And so that's one of the areas that we're dealing with. But more importantly, we want to end penal slavery in the United States.
That's right.
When we end penal slavery, we end the school-to-prison pipeline, right? We end the issues of mass incarceration. We end, for the most part, our targeting our community, right, for mass incarceration, all right? And so that's one of the ideas of building the People's Senate and raising this people's consciousness and understanding to what degree we have to resist. Right. So that's what we're doing.
Okay, okay. Hey, thank you.
Spirit of Mandela.org/People's Senate.
Okay.
Okay. That's what people need to go to.
There you have it, the real news about the campaign to end and abolish slavery in the United States as we know it under the 13th Amendment, how we're going to organize to gain our own independence, how we're going to move forward on the international level to have the international community weigh in on this issue. We already recognize that the United States has been cited for genocide. And as Jalil just outline the case. So we're asking all our viewers and our listeners to look into this and make a decision on what you think you should or should not do in this regard. Thank you, Jalil. Thank you for enlightening us and educating us, brother.
Absolutely, brother. Let me make one selfish plug, right?
Make a selfish plug.
We are also building what we call decolonization programs across the country, right? And these decolonization programs evolve out of Black Panther Party survival programs. The survival programs of the Black Panther Party were defensive. We are building what we call decolonization programs, which are offensive. We are creating a method from which we can divorce ourselves from the system by creating these alternatives, these called decolonization programs. If anyone wants to learn more about decolonization programs, I urge you to get the book, We Are Our Own Liberators, that explains the whole dynamics of building towards what we call Front for Liberation of New African Nation and decolonization programs. And you can get the book from blackdragonmme.com. blackdragonmme.com. We are our own liberators. So if we don't liberate ourselves, no one else will.
There you have it, the real news. And we ask you to continue to support the real news and Rattling the Bars. Where you going to get this kind of information from? Where you going to get a former political prisoner, prisoner of war, come in and educate you about genocide, colonialization, and decolonialization. And more importantly, give you a strategy on how to eradicate all the above. So we thank you, and we ask you to continue to support Rattling the Bars and the real news. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for watching the Real News Network, where we lift up the voices, stories, and struggles that you care about most. And we need your help to keep doing this work. So please, tap your screen now, subscribe, and donate to the Real News Network. Solidarity forever.